Right, I'm going to go now to, in principle, the sort of the regulator almost, the person who's going to set the rules, set the game and the goalposts. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Will Cavendish, who's from the UK, with a whole raft, I think, of policy measures, instruments and ideas against a very tough and challenging target of reducing emissions drastically by 2050, and really trying to convince people that this is the path to go down. So first of all, how are you going to do that? And is it credible? Even though we had a change of government in the UK, is it credible, and is it actually the kind of partnership between cities and people and industry that's going to really make a difference? So, Will.
Thanks very much. And before I start, can I say that when you knock around different events and so on, you occasionally come across jobs that you really wish you had. And being evaluator for the South Africa World Cup has got to be one of them. And I've just made a note saying, career plan, evaluator for the Brazilian Olympics. So yes. I've now changed my career trajectory as a result of this interaction. I wanted to, as invited, want to talk a bit about national policy frameworks. How can you take forward the national policy frameworks that create the environment in which individuals, cities, firms, enterprises invest in innovation, invest in low carbon, make this work. And when you sort of step back and look at this, as indeed the Danish Commission had done yesterday, and as we've done in the UK, it all looks very simple. Okay, basically you have to electrify heat, electrify power, decarbonize electricity. And then deal with some sort of nasty sectors like agriculture and aviation that are sort of not so clear yet what you do, but the solution will come in time. And it's actually strategically very simple. The policy problem, national perspective, is that it's very long term, it's system-wide, it's utterly transformational, it's expensive, and it's disruptive. And so the challenge for someone like myself advising governments is how do you create the policy frameworks within which a long-term, systematic, transformational, expensive and disruptive challenge can be tackled effectively. And I think there are a number of things that are critical to that, but I would highlight two, definitely. One is, the first, a very powerful analysis and narrative of what you're seeking to achieve that brings people with you now and in the future. And the second is, long-term, entrenched, systematic and effective policy frameworks. Let me start with the analysis and the narrative. And this is something that's very important to the new government in London, I think others outside as well, that this transition we're seeking to achieve is not something we're doing because we feel well-meaning towards the globe. We certainly do feel well-meaning toward the globe. We certainly do think that leaving a globe that is fit for our children matters. But actually, a low-carbon future is one which is a secure future. We're all hooked on fossil fuels. We all know what's happening to fossil fuels. We all know what's happening to fossil fuel demand as the emerging economies rise. And a future in which we depend still heavily on those is not a secure future. Likewise, we've just been through, as Greg was mentioning, a very, very serious recession. We know it's a pattern of recessions that out of recessions come new economy. The new economy is born out of the old. And when you look at this, a green economy is a prosperous economy. It's an economy with jobs. And that combination of security, prosperity, and ethics is a powerful one, I think, to draw on. But of course, narratives aren't enough. You need to put in place the policy frameworks that allow this systematic, long-term, transformational, expensive change to occur. What we've tried to do in the UK is put in place a number of things. The first is very long-lasting, credible, and aligned strategic goals. We have passed legally binding goals for carbon emission reduction, 80% by 2050, 34% to 2020, and more in 2020, conditional on what the EU decides collectively. Those have actually been enshrined in law, and every department in the UK has a legally binding carbon budget, which it has to adhere to. Our Treasury, which usually doles out money, is now very interested in my department because we dole out carbon permits. And that's a form of currency which gives you some power. So they're seeking to work with us on that. But that legally binding carbon budget on departments makes them take it seriously over the next 5 years, the 5 years after that, the 5 years after that, and the 5 years after that. There's sort of 4 of these already in place. The second thing we've done is create an independent committee on climate change, which has the statutory responsibility to scrutinise and report on whether government's living up to its own legally binding targets. So you're trying to create a bit of edge in the policy framework, some transparency, some public reporting that ensures that government does live up to its commitments. And so that combination of legally binding long-term instruments that impact on all bits of government and indeed, because of that, society, and transparency and reporting, powerful reporting frameworks kind of matters. The second thing, of course, is you've got to focus long-term, got to focus on critical bits of infrastructure. So over time, the last government and this government is trying to put in place the resourcing of critical infrastructure, glitches, which we know are going to hold us back. In our case, for example, in offshore wind, ports is a major problem. It's something that a number of companies and others reporting and working on the offshore wind have said to us. So we're looking to try and free up that supply constraint. Grids, infrastructure, absolutely critical networks that's going to support all of this. It needs very, very serious transformation and change. And providing the right blend of public finance, public incentive, and private finance for that is crucial. But then, of course, in the medium term, it's getting change going in each of the key sectors. Firstly, go after the low-hanging fruit, go after the easy wins. In our country, we waste money colossally in our buildings. We just chuck money out of the window, every day. I come to Denmark and look with envy at the quality of your built infrastructure. I go back home tonight and I will freeze, and despite spending more on my heating than you do here. So, that is nonsensical. So that's just a simple business proposition to capitalize the savings that come out of proper energy efficiency and retrofitting in homes and put in place business models that allow us, all kinds of enterprises to come in and offer that. But likewise in the major energy sectors, to put in place the incentive regimes that provide the right incentive for long-term low-carbon investment, whether that's the emission trading system, supplemented by a price floor, specific levies designed to support particular industries. They all need to be put together to provide the right incentive for low-carbon investment. It's a very complex design challenge, and indeed as the cost of technology changes, so you have to look at these things again. And getting right the longer-term incentives without locking in the wrong technology is an ongoing policy challenge. But in principle, it's the right thing. It's the right thing to do. So my very sort of broad brush answer to the challenge of how do you achieve this at a national level is make sure you take people with you by having an analysis and narrative that really builds very, very widespread support for this over time. Put in place the legally binding or long-term credible targets and commitments which gives confidence to individuals and investors about the long-term plans of government, and then supplement that with infrastructure packages, with incentive mechanisms, long-term programs that again provide the right incentives for long-term capital to provide this transformation.
Okay, thanks very much, Will. I mean, there is a question, though, that whilst this sounds a very well-connected and wired-up set of policies, everyone talking to each other, all running under the same currency, carbon or financial, that actually at the end of the day, people have got to go out and make their living. And there's a sort of an investment required, you're saying, from people as well as from, essentially prospective businesses. And I think the daily life of most people in all around the world is that if they don't find it easy to hand, despite the narrative, they'll just go back to whatever they did before. So how do you see, in a country like the UK, creating the sort of the practical aspect of the narrative so that when people go to the DIY store, they can easily find the products and the services? Isn't there a kind of a time delay? And doesn't that potentially lead to an unfair investment in some parts of the market just to get things going? In other words, you don't really wait for the market to take over. You really try to push things forward.
I think it's a very, very good question. One of the things I think collectively we've done, this comes from a climate change perspective more rather than an energy and low carbon perspective, is really overdo the degree to which we expect people to fundamentally disrupt their lives in order to be in this future. I mean, we say, I've not said this, I've got to blame my politicians on this, but the politicians say, this is a massive challenge, it needs a massive transformation. So actually, we'll live in homes, we'll switch on appliances, we'll go to work, will be in vehicles. They'll just be powered very differently than they have been previously. We'll use appliances, but they will be just far more efficient, or they'll use a different source than they have done previously. So I think we need to play down the degree to which we expect massive behaviour change on the part of individuals to drive that. I think it's unrealistic, and I think the evidence suggests it doesn't work. So in our own energy efficiency programs in the past, for every pound that you got through kind of retrofitted energy efficiency, people turned up the thermostat, you know, to eliminate 40% of the saving, because actually they don't want to be in sweaters. Maybe in Denmark it's different. I don't know. Your films always suggest that you want to be in heavy sweaters with, you know, with lace muffs and so on and so forth. I don't believe it. But most of our citizens in the UK want to live in t-shirts, actually, and if they can get a temperature in a t-shirt. So we've got to underdo that. So that means we've got to work much harder on things like product standards. I think labeling is okay, but that's a consumer reaction. Product standards, the investments that go behind the products. You want to go in, switch on your light. You don't want to have to kind of switch the green light bulb. You want to switch on the one that's powered behind the scenes. You want a whole household that's managed for you to be efficient in its energy use. You don't have to be wanting to, make complex calculations all night about how you optimize your energy use in your own household. You want to go home, have a glass of wine, sit with the kids, in my case, chat with the wife, and just relax. So we've got to work behind the scenes. We've got to change the infrastructure with companies. We've got to change products with companies. And that means sophisticated understanding between government and the private sector about what the barriers are, what the opportunities are, what the financing needs are, what the long-term incentives are. And that's, I think, a far more productive way than expecting our citizenry to radically transform their lives, which I think is either necessary or likely.
Thank you, Will.